Good morning, everyone. This is Hazel Adam Shango. I'm speaking to you live from New York City on Sunday, July 10th, 2016. This particular live stream presentation is for the Burlington, Vermont Parents of Children with Special Needs Meetup. Hi, you guys. Hope you're listening. I did send the link through the Meetup discussion board. We got started a little late, but we're here now. Again, my name is Hazel Adam Shanko. I'm the founder and CEO of Advocate of Choice, beingspecialnyc.com. I started the organization about 2 years ago. I really am dedicated to getting information out to parents. Primarily, I started in New York City, but I'm working throughout the Northeast Corridor, Connecticut, New Jersey, Vermont, Maine, Rhode Island. Just want to make sure that parents in the Northeast Corridor are really aware of what they're entitled to within the public education system in their state. Interesting enough, I created the ABCs of the IEP PowerPoint that we're about to go through in October 2014. You can see that on the screen. And it was one of my first presentations I created when I started Advocate of Choice and Being Special. But this particular PowerPoint presentation is great for any parent who lives in any state in the United States. I made it very generic, even though I presented in New York City often, that kind of thing. We do have an open chat. If you'd like to ask any questions along the way, we're going to get started. The IEP process. The Individualized Education Plan, that's what we call the IEP, is a tool that is used by schools to ensure that children with special educational needs receive the services they require under the law. And so there are federal laws that protect the rights of children who are found or identified as having a particular disability that impacts their learning. Now, that could be a physical disability, such as cerebral palsy, which would come under an orthopedic impairment. It could be a specific learning disability, dyslexia, that's difficulty with reading, and language-based types of things, reading, writing, spelling, listening, speaking. But also, when we get into speaking, you do have a speech and language disability category. So there are 13 categories under the federal law, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that are protected by this education plan. And the plan gets reviewed every year, and children are supposed to be tested or reevaluated every 3 years. It's very important for parents to understand the IEP process in order for them to, 1, help their child achieve their school goals, 2, monitor their child's progress in school on a regular basis, and 3, intervene, and advocate on behalf of their child if there needs to be a change in the special services they need or receive. And we're kind of going to go through how children are identified as being in need of an IEP, how they go about they call it classification of the 13 different disabilities conditions, and after the plan is developed, there are goals that are set forth. And you kind of, as a parent of a child with special needs, you always have to monitor whether or how your child is reaching or attaining those goals that are in the IEP. Okay, the IEP process. This works in every state across the country. Each state has their own set of special education regulations and procedures, but they're overall, in general, based upon the federal law, and it kind of works the same way every state you go to. So they look at an individual student's schoolwork, the medical or physical condition, or some type of behavior may warrant investigation or intervention. So your child's in third grade, and the third grade teacher notices that your child really hasn't learned how to read with the fluency, that speed, or hasn't been able to decode words effectively in order to build their vocabulary, in order to sound words out, so that they can figure out what new words sound like, and going further into their definition, that kind of thing. So there's generally some kind of indication. Again, it could be a medical or physical condition. Some children, when they're born with cerebral palsy, or they have a traumatic brain injury, some type of medical or physical condition occurs in utero at the time of birth, shortly after birth, or in their early childhood years. There's an indication that perhaps they're not processing information clearly, and parents are alerted, and if parents aren't alerted, certainly someone at the school is alerted. And then secondly, a school representative. It could be a teacher, it could be the school social worker, the school psychologist, or the school guidance counselor, or the student's parents request that assistance be given to the student to help overcome the identified difficulties. So basically, if your child is in third grade having trouble reading, you as a parent could write a letter to the teacher, said, hey, I noticed he's getting really low scores on his vocabulary test, or the first quarter grades were below 65, and they've been below 65 in first and second grade also. I think that there's an issue. It's okay. I always advise parents to put whatever their concerns are in writing. Very short letter. It can be in any language. The school has the obligation of having that letter translated and reaching out to you. The issues are documented, written down, and a plan for intervention is developed. So once the school social worker or the school guidance counselor gets your letter about your concerns, they're not going to immediately go to testing and evaluation, but they will be observed. The student will be observed while the plan is put into place, generally for about 6 to 8 weeks. So the school generally has a team that meets once a week, every other week. It usually includes the school social worker, school guidance counselor if you're in a small school, assistant principal, and a few of the teachers. And they say, well, hey, Jane's having trouble reading. Her mom has sent me this letter. We'd like to give her 20 extra minutes of one-to-one reading help for the next 4 to 5 weeks, next 6 weeks. We want to see if that's going to show any improvement, or it'll help pinpoint or identify the issues that require further study. So, if the student's issues require further study, a school representative will contact the parent. They'll call you into school. They'll meet with you to discuss the issues and request that the parent give their written permission for the student to be tested and assessed. And generally, when you're going for what we call an initial evaluation, this is the first time your child has ever been formally evaluated by school staff. Under the federal law, they must secure your consent, your written consent, not just verbal. And generally, that initial testing includes an educational evaluation. What grade levels is the student functioning on, or in reading, math, science, history, but overall they'll do broad reading and math, so that information is always very helpful. There also will be a psychological assessment. How is the child developing, or the student developing, socially and emotionally in reference to his peers? Generally, there is a social history. Sometimes that can be done by the school psychologist. Sometimes it's done by a school social worker. It just depends on your state. Some states, they try to cut costs. They only have the school social workers in the schools helping parents with resources and information, and they have the school psychologists gather the social history of the child from the parent during the interview. And the social history involves birth weight, were there any difficulties with the birth, excuse me, when did the child first walk? When did the child first talk? All what we call developmental milestones. Generally, children walk somewhere between 9 months and 1 year. They're babbling 6 months to 8 months. Generally, the first to the second year, again, they're walking. They might be learning or acquiring one or two words, or wah wah, that kind of thing, mama, stop, no. They develop no very quickly and very close to year 2. And so generally you'll have an educational evaluation, a psychological evaluation, a social history. They will ask the pediatrician or the child's doctor to fill out a physical form. So we want to know from the doctor, is the child being treated for anemia? Does the child have a particular condition? Kind of what's going on. The only time a speech and language evaluation is offered during the very first time you're having your child tested, is if there's any indication by the teachers or the school staff that there are speech or language processing issues. But generally, it's social history, educational evaluation, psychological evaluation, and a physical evaluation. After testing is completed, the school representatives, the school psychologist, the general education teacher, a special education teacher, social worker, and any other specialist, that could be occupational therapist, speech and language therapist, physical therapist, they'll meet with each other to discuss the results and to decide if the student meets the criteria for special education or related services or accommodation of all of these. So what I'm talking about now in the individualized education plan process is the very first time a parent asks for the school to intervene, or they've observed that their child is having some great or significant level in learning. Now, just before we go on, there are children that receive what we call early intervention services. You know something, or the child is having some developmental issues or challenges as an infant and into the early years, ages 1, 2, 3. Generally, early intervention services, they can start as early as about 6 or 8 months, but most of the parents here that I've spoken with in New York whose children have gone through that process, they generally start at about 18 months. And early intervention services are not something that come from the school district, but come from the state level. And that's in all 50 states in the United States. So if you're listening right now and you're the parent of a child that's 1.5 or 2 years old and hasn't started walking, hasn't been making noises, or you think there's something going awry with their hearing or their vision, you can go and Google for your State Department of Education, early intervention services. And generally there will be a help list there. You can click onto that website. They have an intake number, and a service coordinator will come out to the house after you finish the intake. They'll come to you in the home, and they'll do a developmental evaluation of your child. And just mark down, not walking, talking very little, no eye contact. They're just making observations when they're with you and the child in the home environment. So there's early intervention, which parents can request from the state. But some children stay with a babysitter or go to preschool. Nothing is ever identified at that level. And then they enter kindergarten at 5th grade and they become school age. And 1st or 2nd grade, the parents notice the child's having difficulty following the teacher, tracking the teacher, completing assignments, things of that nature, up and down out of their seats if there's any hyperactivity or paying attention. And then that's when the initial evaluation process begins. The team, once they have all these evaluations, will meet with the parents on the initial evaluation, even if it's found that your child isn't eligible for any service, or there's nothing too significantly different about the stage and phase of their development as compared to their peers, to other 5-year-olds, to other 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds. They still have to have a meeting because you put in a written request for evaluation. So even if they don't find your child eligible for services, they will meet with you and tell you why your child is not eligible for services at this time. Or if the child is found eligible for services, the team will notify the parent in writing and invite the parent to the meeting where they'll discuss the results of the testing and present the reports that outline what strengths and weaknesses the child has and in what specific areas. So you're going to have a meeting either way. That's always going to be the outcome there. You're going to have a meeting whether your child will move forward with the IEP process or not. There will be a meeting with the school officials. By the end of the meeting, the team and the parents will have to decide will have decided the who, what, when, where, and why the student will receive special services. I always call them the 5 W's. That's what you always want to know. Who's going to provide the service, what type of services are going to be provided, when are they going to be provided, where are they going to be provided, and why they're going to be provided. The parent can then agree or disagree with any part of the recommended plan. So when this IEP team comes together, you have the school psychologist, the social worker, a general ed teacher, general education teacher, a special education teacher, but the parent is part of the team also. You're actually a member of the team, and you have say-so, and you have power. Okay, this plan that they develop at that meeting is called an individualized education plan, an IEP, and it will begin generally. This is in the state of New York, but generally most states, and it's in the federal law, will begin within 10 days of the parent giving written permission to initiate the plan. So you've sent a letter to the school expressing your concerns. The school is also concerned, and so they give you a consent form to sign. Give us permission to test your child and evaluate your child. The evaluation has taken place. They're calling you in. There have been some difficulties or some challenges found. And now they're proposing a plan on how they're going to address those challenges throughout the school day and the school week. And then you have the right to say, yes, I agree with this plan, or no, I don't want to deal with this plan at all. If you agree with the plan will be reviewed every 12 months from the date it starts. So if you have this IEP meeting with the school in November of 2016, and the IEP is initiated then, by next November 2017, you're going to have what we call an annual review, a yearly review. Are the goals correct? Is the child making progress with the strategies that we're trying now? Smaller classroom, speech and language therapy twice a week, that kind of thing. If the parents in the school do not meet within those 12 months or within that 12-month period of time, the plan is considered to be out of compliance. IEPs do not expire. So depending upon your state, and in the state of Vermont, the IEP will have a start date and an end date. But just because you go beyond that end date, say November 12th, 2017, that does not mean that the IEP has expired and it's no longer in effect. IEPs are always in effect till you remove the child from special education services. That IEP that has not been reviewed in 12 months is considered to be out of compliance, but it's still in effect. Any questions at this time? We do have an open chat where you can text. And I don't see anything coming up. We're going to keep on moving. So, in this IEP document, there are goals and objectives. During the team meeting, a draft of the IEP, including its goals and objectives, is written. The goals and objectives are the special points, end quote, that will be paid attention to by the teacher and the other professionals that work with your child in order to help the child with schoolwork, social behaviors, or any particular school-based challenge or issue. However, the students and the parents also have a role to play. So let's get to a little bit of definitions. A goal is an observable and measurable end result, meaning you can see and count what should happen or what has happened. An objective is just a very specific result that a person or system aims to achieve within a time frame. So your child could have the goal of being able to decode 25 words. That's the measurable part, the count. 25 sight words with 75% accuracy by the end of the year. And with the objective of improving his reading ability and fluency. And fluency is speed when we talk about that. Your child's IEP goals and objectives are important to understand because they can tell you what your child needs to work on specifically and the steps he or she needs to take in order to accomplish the goals successfully. Now that your child has an IEP, how can you help your child do their personal best in school? Parents are a child's first advocate. The more you know about your child's condition, disability, or special needs, the more you can inform others about them and help them to help your child. So something that's very important, whenever you're thinking that something's not quite going correctly in your child's development or something's going awry, you want to reach out to a developmental pediatrician. So there are general pediatricians, and they see the babies after they're born, and they give you your child vaccinations, and you go there when there's a sore throat and that kind of thing. But a developmental pediatrician could be your ally. That is a pediatrician that's especially trained in monitoring the development of children, because there's certain developmental goals at certain benchmarks, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months. By 2 years, in general, children should be potty trained. However, if a child has a cognitive disability, an intellectual disability, and they learn very slowly, there's been some perhaps injury to the brain because of a fall, something that happened in utero as far as the formation, they may be processing information slowly, so that child may not actually be toilet trained until they're 3.5, 4 years old. So a developmental pediatrician is something that every parent should seek out if they have any questions about whether their child is developing physically and emotionally in a typical manner, in a manner in accordance with their peers or other children their age. Here are 3 things that you can do to advocate on behalf of your child. Number 1, you can ask the school to print out a copy of your child's IEP in your native language. If you speak another language, like here in New York City, because there are just numerous languages that are spoken, there are like 7 or 8 key languages that the Department of Education, New York City Department of Education, prints all materials in. And the IEP is one of them. So you could actually have it in Spanish, you could have it in French or Haitian Creole, you could have it in Mandarin, and many states are responsive to parents' needs in that regard. You need to read every page of that IEP very carefully. I'm going to try to pull up a sample of an IEP in Vermont at the end of the PowerPoint so that you can kind of see what information is there. Something that I just heavily recommend is that parents use a dictionary or the computer, use Google if you have to, in order to understand some of the words that people are using to describe your child or the type of work that they're going to do. So when you receive copies of the educational evaluation, and you should always ask for copies of all the reports, the evaluations, not just the IEP. You'll see the psychological evaluation report. There'll be words, there'll be clinical language that'll be used in those reports that you'll probably, if you're not in the medical field, you'll have to look up. Number 2, learn how to put your concerns in writing. This is key. being able to communicate, not just via telephone. And that will be something that the school will always attempt to do with you. They'll, oh, hi, Miss Adams, I'm just calling, your son or your daughter did not pass the midterm exam, and I just wanted to let you know. My thing is, send me an email. I'll give them my email address. Could you please just send me the email? That way you have a written record and a date and time of these concerns that folks at the school are having around your child's production of work, their behaviors, that kind of thing. When my kids were growing up, all three of my kids are much older now, ages 30, 24, and 18. But while the children were growing up, I kept a notebook every school year for each child. That's just so I could keep everything together. Some people may choose to put it on their smartphone, on their laptops, whatever that is. From a technological point of view, I'm a pencil and paper girl still. And so I just kept a notebook for them. September 3rd, the first day of school, first day of first grade for little Mary. She wore this, and this. And you'll look back on those records, actually, and they'll be very helpful when they get fevers, when they come home injured from school. You have to write down dates and times and what the child is telling or saying to you that's going on. If you have questions about anything going on in your child's school or about his or her IEP, you write it down, date it, sign the paper, and send it into the school. You can decide if you want to send a letter or just make a telephone call, but at least you will have a written log of your concerns or incidents as they come up. It's just really impossible in this day and age. We're impacted by so much media, social media, things at work, or if you're a stay-at-home mom, or even if you're homeschooling, you need to keep adequate records of what's going on and what's happening with your child. Number 3, speak up. Ask for help. Contact your child's school guidance counselor, or an agency social worker, and explain to someone what your concerns are. If you never say anything to anyone, no one can help you or your child. So a lot of people associate a stigma with finding out that their child has a particular learning difference, physical challenge or disability. I try not to use the word disability too much, but special needs. We have to use words and language that people can understand and that they can relate to when we're trying to discuss or describe something that's going on for a child. So those words are the most familiar that people, are most familiar with. But you have to speak up and ask for help, whether it's the pediatrician. Most general pediatricians, depending upon what they have in what I call your toolkit, they may never have seen a child who's actually has a specific learning disability. They wouldn't know how to identify that. That's really a clinical psychologist. That's someone with a PhD, or what we call a PsyD, a PSY dot capital D. A psychiatrist is an MD, is a medical doctor. There's also a professional that you could seek out, a neuropsychologist. Again, someone with the PhD or PsyD, and they kind of look at all aspects of the child's development and learning, social, emotional, academic, speech and language. The neuropsychologist can do a very comprehensive overview and testing of a child. And there are also neurologists who are MDs, and they're doctors of the brain, and they can study like the physicality of the brain. Is there any area, after looking at scans or something, that's a bit underdeveloped? Does the child have an abnormal EEG? You'll sometimes see that in kids with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, children who may have a slowing in processing in one part of their brain. There's technology now that can kind of really identify that. But there's several different professionals that you can reach out to, and you can Google at this particular point. Years ago, when the first special education law was passed, it's called Public Law 94-142. That was passed on June 30th, 1975. Parents were just very unaware especially about learning disabilities and cognitive or intellectual disabilities. Uh, Parents and the general public were just not aware. Those children generally didn't attend school on a regular basis prior to the passing of that law. There were some disabilities and communities within the United States of America, people who are blind, people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Those communities, the blind and the deaf communities, have very long standing in the United States of America, and they've had organizations since the 1800s. You've heard about Helen Keller and things of that nature, people of that nature. So they have a long, strong advocacy history, and many of the residential boarding schools that were first set up in the 1800s and early 1900s were for children who were deaf or hard of hearing, or children who were blind. Those were actually the first young people, who then grew into adults also, that were serviced, in quotes, or were provided special educational training before any laws were passed. Okay, your rights under the law. And as I said, this whole ABCs of the IEP is just a really broad overview of that whole special education, initiating that special education process, dealing with your child's IEP. You have a right to write a letter to the school to ask for a review of your child's IEP before the 12-month annual review if you think that the plan is not working for your child. So under this federal law, so the first law was 94-142, Public Law, Education for All Handicapped Children Act. And that was June of 1975. That law has been amended and evolved into what folks call now IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Sometimes you'll see it written as IDEIA, and that's the latest version, which is 2004. So they're actually working on revising it in Washington, D.C. now. I have been working on it actually for the last 10 years, 11 years, trying to revise that particular law. But under that law, under IDEA, the parents are granted several different rights. And one of the rights is you don't have to wait till your child fails at something or at the end of the school year in order to look at the IEP again and to see if these goals are actually working. Maybe initially in the IEP they said your child should receive speech and language services twice a week. But 4 months later, September, say October, November, December, January, you've gone to a developmental pediatrician and your child's been diagnosed with autism. Well, you get a copy of that diagnosis in writing from the developmental pediatrician, and you submit it with a letter to the school asking for a re-evaluation or a review of your child's IEP to incorporate this new information. Generally, children with autism are diagnosed along the autistic spectrum. There's some underlying language-based disorder. And so speech and language can become very important, and the frequency of that service of speech and language therapy can become very important in children diagnosed along the autistic spectrum. So anytime you get any new information from a doctor or a professional about your child, and it's the middle of the school year, even if it's the end, you can always write a letter and ask to reconvene the IEP meeting, or you can request a re-evaluation so that they incorporate the new information. You attach a copy of the letter from the doctor or the occupational therapist, the OT, or the physical therapist, the PT, stating that that child has a new set of needs or a new diagnosis. You have a right to disagree with how the reports tell your story and your child's story. If you think that the team has made a mistake in reporting something that you've told them, like your child's birth date, your home address, how you described an event in your child's life, make sure they correct their mistakes. When you come to that IEP meeting, and each of the evaluators, the school psychologist, the OT, the occupational therapist, the school guidance counselor, they're all handing in reports. And you need to get a copy of all those reports. And you need to take your time to read those reports before you sign anything else. It's okay to go into an IEP meeting, for you guys to have the discussion about the reports, and for you to say, I would like to adjourn this meeting now. I'd like to take about a week or 24 or 48 hours to read through these reports on my own, and I'd like to reconvene this meeting within 1 week or within 2 weeks. And so I'm using this language like reconvene and reevaluation and adjournment so that you'll get a feel for how you can utilize it during the IEP process and the meeting process. Under your rights under the law, your child has a right to a free and appropriate public education. We call that FAPE, F-A-P-E, free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. We call least restrictive environment the LRE. And you will see FAPE, F-A-P-E, in the LRE as a phrase throughout many special education and partial hearing cases, court cases, and even in the federal law, in different books that you may buy from Barnes & Nobles or online on Nook that talk about the special education process. So free and appropriate public education. It's free. You don't have to pay for it. Appropriate. It has to be individualized to your child's needs. Thus, the Individualized Education Plan, the IEP. Sometimes services are offered to children in the IEP that are not appropriate for that particular child. A child could initially be found eligible for special education services under one of these 13 conditions. And I have another PowerPoint that really outlines the 13 conditions very clearly. But just let's say emotional disability. And that is the classification that your child is found eligible for services under, and you're given some counseling services, and they're placed in a smaller classroom. Instead of 25 children, there'll be 12 children in the classroom. With a special education teacher, which means that a teacher who has a master's degree in special education for that grade level. And as it turns out, as your child matures, that emotionality kind of settles down. But what emerges through some more testing, and may even have been there during the first set of testing, is that actually your child has a specific learning disability in math. So that classification may well change from emotional disability, ED, to learning disability, LD, at another meeting. So your child is constantly growing and developing. And one thing about the whole concept of disabilities do not go away. Children and adults learn how to compensate for those challenges that are with them. But a disability is permanent. Now, a medical condition can change. It can be chronic. It can be this. It can be acute. Things of that nature. But disabilities are permanent. And in my advocacy work over the last 20, 25 years, oftentimes I've had to have been the individual that had to explain that to parents. They have done their due diligence. They've taken the children to all these specialists. They've received these reports. And even the specialists have gone over the reports with them, but it still hasn't sunk into the parent of what a disability actually is, what that concept means, pros and cons of even using the word disability or the language. So, but if your child has a specific learning disability in reading, they will always have that learning disability. What you try to do with the IEP and the special services is help the child compensate for that challenge or that individual learning difference so that they can still move forward towards living an independent life. You can teach them certain techniques that will lessen the challenge of them learning new words and being able to read more freely and more quickly. So, and with the least restrictive environment, there have been a lot of court cases. The law, the IDEA speaks to this very heavily. Least restrictive environment is thought in the IDEA to be the environment where a child with a disability or a learning difference spends time with children who are non-disabled, and you want to maximize, we call it mainstreaming, you want to maximize that amount of time that children spend together with their peers, whether they're disabled or non-disabled. There are certain times when your child will need a specialized classroom. That means a classroom with a lower class size, 12 to 1, 12 students to 1 teacher. It could be 12 to 1 to 1. It could be 12 students, 1 teacher, 1 paraprofessional or teaching assistant. It could be as small as 6 to 1 to 4. You'll see a 6 to 1 to 4. The first number in a classroom size ratio is always the number of students, 6 students. The second number in the ratio is 1. That's 1 teacher. And the last number in the ratio, 6 to 1 to 4, represents the paraprofessional or the teaching assistant that's in the room. Usually when you see a 6 to 1 to 4 situation, it's either when children have pretty significant physical disabilities and they're in wheelchairs and they need assistance with toileting, with feeding, and meals, things of that nature. So each one of those children, almost of the 6, will have 1 paraprofessional that services them. It could be a behavioral situation where each of the children, or at least 4 of those children, need a 1-to-1 paraprofessional sitting next to them, helping them stay focused, helping them stay attentive, reeling in certain behaviors, redirecting children. So there are many different types of programs that can service children with individual learning differences and physical differences. This means that if the current classroom, school, or location is not working for your child, you can request in writing that your child's classroom be changed. Your child's school can be changed, or that his or her IEP be changed to reflect what type of environment, that least restrictive environment, that classroom size, the number of individuals in the classroom, what type of environment will be in the child's best educational interest, and that will best help the child meet the goals and objectives of the IEP. Any questions and answers at this time? I'm not really seeing that everyone might be coming into the live stream. This will be posted on the YouTube channel for Being Special, NYC, Advocate of Choice. You can find us on YouTube. My website is www.beingspecialnyc.com. You'll see a lot of information there. We're on Facebook as Being Special NYC. On Twitter, New York City NYC Ed Advocate. So right now, for my Vermont parents, I'm hoping to meet you really soon, or at least by September. I'm still trying to work on a meeting space for Being Special Vermont. I'm looking at one of the public libraries there in Burlington, Vermont. And I'm really looking forward to coming up and meeting with you guys and getting into the specifics of your individual children's needs and how I can help you with this upcoming school year. Basically, I'm clicking on a website to education.vermont.gov. And here you're going to see an overview, laws, policies, publications, forms, their general resources. They have a parental resources page. Sometimes there are disputes that have to be resolved with this special education process. We call it due process. You can also use mediation. Much more intricate. Those are separate presentations in and of themselves. If you scroll down a little further, there's some special education forms. Here we're talking about notice of meeting. Let's take a look at that. This is the notice that you should receive from your child's school. Something like this. It says, "Dear parent, this is a letter to invite you to a meeting for," it'll be your child's name, "in order to develop a special education plan, evaluation plan, review information, develop or revise or annually review." Remember, we talked about annual review of the IEP. They're calling it program, individualized education program. Free and appropriate public education, FAPE. Remember, we discussed FAPE. But that's what the form looks like when they're inviting you to the meeting, and they're going to say who's actually going to be here at the meeting. Student when appropriate. That's something that the parent has to decide when the student should attend the meeting. Definitely when kids are in high school, they should be a part of their meeting, because there's a part of the IEP called the transition plan, which kind of begins at age 14 but can begin as early as age 12, that the kids really need to be a part of, because it's kind of looking forward. What am I going to do after high school? What type of high school? Am I interested in more so vocational? Am I going to go to college prep high school? What is it that career-wise I may be tending to, or my interest, vocational interest? Let's take a look at another document. Evaluation plan and report. So this is the cover page that you guys would receive in Vermont. Has the date when you requested the evaluation. Then there's that planning meeting we talked about where all the professionals meet with you. The date they receive consent. Now you're seeing where everything that I was discussing and the language I was using, where it comes up. And then the evaluation and planning team members. The parent is a member. Remember, I told you the parent is a member of that IEP team. The student when appropriate. The local education agency representative. That's the local school district rep. The special education teacher or service provider. General education teacher. Individual who can interpret instructional implications, that's generally the school psychologist. Individual who can conduct diagnostic examinations, that's school psychologist also. Disability determination, the following information will be used. Adverse effects, listening comprehension, written expression, basic reading skills, motor skills. So you see, they have to justify every service, a justification of that delay that would affect future success in the home, school, or community without intervention. So that's kind of what's going on there. Notice of a special education evaluation. This is when they're telling you that they'd like to evaluate. We have agreed to determine eligibility. Remember, we use that word. There's generally 60 days. If this is an initial evaluation, we have 60 days from the date we have sent you this notice to complete the record review. So if your child never received any early intervention services, they're in first, second, third, fourth, fifth, it doesn't matter what grade they're in as long as they're in school, you write the letter requesting that an initial evaluation be conducted because you believe that your child is having some learning difficulties. From that date that you sign that letter, even though the school's going to send you a consent form, the 60 days actually begins on the date you submit that letter to the school system. And they have approximately 2 months to meet with you, finish the testing, review all the records, and then call you in for a meeting again and to see if your child is eligible for services. It's a 60-day cycle. Let's see. Here, the IEP. The Individualized Education Plan. This is what it looks like in the state of Vermont. Has the school district, the annual meeting date, the date, if it's initial, that's the date you're meeting, and it can go 1 year. 1 year, and that's the next annual review date. Child's name, disability category, one of those 13 categories. The child could be orthopedically impaired, traumatic brain injury, specific learning disability, deaf blindness, orthopedic impairment, intellectual disability. That's formerly known as MR or mental, of the slow processing of the cognitive facilities. And there are there's OHI, other handicap impaired, and that's a nice birth in one sense because it catches kids who have like severe asthma, sickle cell anemia, something very particular health-wise, other health impairment. It's about 10 of the 13. And so there are the 3 other, I'll put that up. I'll try to put that up by next weekend as far as the 13 conditions and a real breakdown of what that is. And they have the IEP team members. They have when the IEP will be initiated. And then they're going to talk about the medical. That's why you're going to get the physical form, vision, hearing, student strengths. We always have to talk about the strengths before and while we're having the conversation about the needs. Academic, social, emotional, personal interests, perceptual, motor. That's your fine motor and gross motor, your handwriting, your walk, which they call a gait, things of that nature. Communication, any issues with language, that kind of thing, and environment. Let's see, other considerations. They'll put in this area any standardized state exams they've taken in English language arts or math or science, that kind of thing. General classroom or current classroom level of educational performance. So your child could actually be in 5th grade, and when this evaluation is done, the academic testing shows that your child is actually reading and math is at a 2nd grade level. So in order to be officially found with a learning disability, a child has to test in one of these assessments 2 years or more beneath their grade level. For developmental and social things, you might be 2 years or more under your age level. But for specific learning disabilities, generally 2 years or more below. If your child is about a year and a half behind, they're probably still going to find them eligible for some type of intensive intervention services, or they may recommend the IEP also. And now here we go to the goals: measurable annual goals and short-term objectives. That's what we were talking about. And they're reviewed at each of those progress report card dates. If you have 8 measurements there. Sometimes some school districts, they only, especially in high school, they're only giving grades 1 time a year. You'll get the progress reports, but they don't get the high school credit till the last marking period. Some school districts are divided semi-annual. High school students only, are going to earn credits here at this 4th quarter and then at the 8th. Or the 4th marking period. It's not actually a quarter. It's the 4th marking period and the 8th marking period. But they have 8 altogether. And post-secondary transition plan. This is what I was talking about with high school students and teenagers attending their IEP meetings. And it's really good if they do, because there are these transition goals. What are their students' preferences, interests, strengths, and needs? And they link information about what are we doing after graduation from high school? Are going to be attending college, or attending a technical school? That kind of thing. They have employment transition goals. After high school, I want to increase my work hours. This is a sample. From 10 hours per week to 20 hours per week in the business department of a local office supply. They have independent living goals that are part of transition goals. Do I want to still stay at home with my parents? Am I going to share an apartment? Am I going to live in a dormitory? So for children who have more significant issues as high schoolers, kids who may have been diagnosed with Down syndrome, or a lower functional level along the autistic spectrum, it could be thought that as the children prepare to leave high school, that they may remain with their parents. There are a lot of, once they turn 18, there are a lot of adult programs that you could kind of see. I won't say a lot, but depending upon where you live and in your area, there are adult programs, day programs that the student can attend. So in this whole special education universe, the child can stay in school that's been identified with a disability and has an IEP, can stay in school till June of their 21st year. So if your child is 20 years old And this upcoming school year begins August or September 2016. If your child's birthday is December 2016, their 21st birthday, then they can only stay in school till June. If your child's birthday if your child is 20 years old now, and their 21st birthday isn't until July, they're just turning 20 now this July, and they won't be 21 until July 10th, 2017. They can actually stay in school an additional year because they didn't turn 21 before the end of the school year in June. So that's pretty much what that means. Sounds complicated, but that's what it means. So there's plenty of stuff on this website, this web link that I have put into your into this PowerPoint presentation. And that's about the size of it right now, just going through the very specific parts. So again, you need to understand this IEP process so that you can help your children achieve their goals. There's going to be a school psychologist involved in there with the testing and evaluation. The issues are going to be documented, written down, reported upon, monitored. And they're going to do some testing. It could be speech and language. It could be an occupational therapist, a physical therapist. The team meets with you, and the child is either found eligible or ineligible. But they still have to meet with you after they do any type of testing to report back to the parents. By the end of the meeting, they're going to be talking about the who, what, when, where, and why this student will receive special services or not. And this plan is called an individualized education plan or program, as you do in Vermont. And there are goals and objectives, which we just saw on the forms that you use in Vermont. The goals are always measurable and will always have a number in there. 25 words, being able to decode 25 words by the end of the 4th semester. Now, and then, you're your child's first advocate. So start looking up any information that they're telling you. Get a copy of your child's IEP, but also ask for a copy of any reports. And use a dictionary or Google to look up the words. Learn how to put your concerns in writing. Keep a log. Send a letter to the school if you want anything done formally. A telephone conversation is not it. Speak up and ask for help. Very, very important that you not be ashamed of anything. You not be afraid of what other people are going to think. You just need to get the services and the assistance that your child requires, and maybe you even require, in order for your child to be most successful in school and to grow and develop and live their best independent life as they move towards maturity. Again, here's the link: education.vermont.gov/special-education, and we have the forms there. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to offer this presentation to you guys in the Burlington, Vermont Parents of Children with Special Needs Meetup group. And I'm hoping to see you guys in September up in Vermont. One of the reasons I picked Burlington, one of my children resides in Vermont, and he said, "Hey Mom, I think maybe some of the parents up this way would really appreciate some of the knowledge that you have and some of the information that you have to share with the parents like you do in New York City." So I thought that it would really be neat to establish the meetup and to get this thing going. If you have any questions, you can always give me a call at 347-427-0828. This is Hazel Adams Shango. I am the founder and CEO of BeingSpecialNYC.com, advocate of choice, and I thank you for listening to today's presentation. Be well.